My partner keeps mentioning things about my appearance, but when confronted claims to not care. Am I taking this the wrong way? Together for 7 years, our lives had intertwined in ways I once thought inseparable. 7 years is a long time, long enough to build a foundation, to understand one another's quirks, fears, and desires. And yet, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was missing. That we were missing something. One key point is that I've always known I carry a certain insecurity within me. It's a constant shadow, following me through every interaction, every mirror reflection, every attempt to feel truly seen. I've always been aware of it, but I don't think it defines me. At least, I try not to let it. It's not the kind of insecurity that begs for constant validation, but rather the quieter kind, the one that whispers doubts when no one else is around to hear. But here's the thing, in all these years, he's never been my hype man. The kind of partner who notices when you've put in effort, who compliments you without prompting, who makes you feel like you're the most dazzling person in the room just by existing. In truth, he's always been neutral about my appearance, an unremarkable silence that cuts deeper than outright criticism. He's never showered me with praises or even offered casual acknowledgments of my looks. On rare occasions, there are comments offhand, sharp-edged, but they're rarely positive. Instead, they linger on the flaws, the imperfections, the little details that I perhaps didn't even notice until he pointed them out. And yet, I've seen him notice. I felt him notice. Not me, but others. Other women. Other men. People we pass on the street, characters on a television screen, strangers in a cafe. His eyes seem to catch every detail, every curve, every flaw, every polished feature. He's quick to observe, quick to remark. She has a striking face, don't you think? Or that guy really needs a haircut. Positive or negative, his observations roll off his tongue with ease, as though the world around him exists to be catalogued and critiqued. It's not even that the comments are cruel, they're just there. Statements of fact, devoid of sentiment but somehow laden with meaning. And in those moments, I can't help but wonder, why doesn't he see me that way? Why doesn't he notice me? Am I so ordinary, so unremarkable, that I don't even warrant a passing thought? I remember once, years ago, he told me about a previous girlfriend. She was, in his words, the kind of woman who turned heads. Someone whose presence alone made him feel more attractive, more confident, more alive. Just being with her made me feel like a better version of myself, he had said with a wistful smile. And while he may not have meant it as a comparison, I couldn't help but feel the sting of it. The unspoken implication that I didn't have that same effect on him. That I was different. Lesser. As the years passed, those thoughts began to fester. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being too sensitive, too critical. But the evidence continued to pile up in subtle, stinging ways. His casual remarks about strangers. His silence when I dressed up for a night out. The way his eyes would linger on the screen when an undeniably beautiful actress appeared, as if he were absorbing every pixel of her perfection. It wasn't jealousy. At least, I don't think it was. I didn't begrudge him his observations. I didn't want to control what he noticed or how he felt. But I couldn't help but wonder why I was excluded from his orbit of admiration. Why, in 7 long years, he had never looked at me with the same awe, the same quiet appreciation, that he so freely gave to the world around him. He once told me, with a casualness that only made it sting more, about a previous girlfriend. She was, by his admission, quite attractive, the kind of woman people noticed without her having to try. The kind of woman who made him feel more attractive simply by standing beside her. It wasn't said maliciously. In fact, I think he meant it as a fond reflection. But it sat with me, lodged in my mind like a pebble in a shoe, small, unassuming, but impossible to ignore. What did he mean by that? That my presence didn't elevate him in the same way? That I was somehow lacking, failing to measure up to this ideal he'd once experienced? I never dared to ask him directly, though I've replayed the moment in my head more times than I'd like to admit. The words loop endlessly, echoing with the weight of an unspoken comparison. That memory was just one among many tiny cuts moments that, on their own, might seem insignificant, but together began to form a pattern. Over the years, his comments have come in a steady trickle, each one delivered with a lightness that belied its impact. Always small things, always phrased with a veneer of humor that made it hard to call them out without feeling petty or overly sensitive. It started with my coats. A casual remark about how they seemed practical, a word that was somehow both neutral and damning. Not everyone needs to make a statement with their outerwear, he'd joke, smiling as if the comment were harmless. But I'd find myself standing in front of the mirror later, scrutinizing every seam and stitch, wondering if I should trade warmth for something trendier, something that might catch his eye. Then there were my shoes. I'd step into the room, and his gaze would flick downward, followed by a familiar smirk. "Oh, I see you're wearing those comfortable shoes again," he'd say, drawing out the word comfortable like it was a dirty secret. I'd laugh it off, what else could I do? But soon after, I'd find myself shoving the offending pair to the back of the closet, as if hiding them would somehow erase the sting of his disapproval. My jeans became another target. It didn't matter what style I wore, high-waisted, cropped, foot-cut, skinny. To him, they were all mom jeans. He'd toss out the phrase so nonchalantly, as if it were an inside joke between us. But it wasn't a joke, not to me. I wasn't wearing mom jeans. I knew I wasn't. And yet, I'd stand in the fitting room with a pile of denim, second-guessing every choice, wondering if this pair or that pair would finally escape his notice. And then there's my hair. I've worn it in every style imaginable, down, curled, straight, braided. But the one I keep coming back to, the one that feels most me, is a simple ponytail. It's practical, easy, and makes me feel put together. But he's never liked it. "I don't think a ponytail really suits you, do you?" he'd say, his tone light, almost curious, as if he were genuinely pondering the question. But it didn't feel like a question. It felt like a judgment. Sometimes I'd try to brush it off, to remind myself that he didn't mean any harm. But other times, I'd feel the frustration bubbling up inside me, threatening to spill over. Why did he always have to comment? Why couldn't he just let me be? The thing is, I want to look good for him. I care about what he thinks, even if I hate that I care so much. Every comment, every joke, every seemingly innocent observation chips away at my confidence, leaving me wondering if I'll ever be enough for him. Or worse, if I ever was enough to begin with. I've started to notice a pattern in how I respond to his remarks. At first, I'd argue, my voice tinged with defensiveness. "These aren't mom jeans, what are you even talking about?" Or "Ponytails are fine." Not everything has to be some big fashion statement. But the arguments never went anywhere. He'd shrug, unconcerned, and I'd be left with the lingering feeling that I was the one overreacting. Eventually, I stopped arguing. Instead, I started changing. I'd get rid of the coat, the shoes, the glasses, whatever item had drawn his ire, and replace it with something else. Something I hoped would meet his elusive, unspoken standard. But no matter what I tried, it never seemed to be enough. There was always something new, some other flaw he'd notice, some other thing that wasn't quite right. And so the cycle continued, an endless loop of small rejections and quiet compromises. Each one was easy enough to brush aside in the moment, but together, they formed a heavy weight I couldn't shake. I told myself I was doing it for me, that I wanted to look my best, to feel confident, but deep down, I knew the truth. I was trying to win his approval. I was chasing something I wasn't even sure he was willing to give. Lately, it's been my glasses. They were new, a style I'd chosen after carefully considering what might feel modern yet understated. I thought they suited me, framing my face well, complementing my features. But it didn't take long for his familiar smirk to appear, his tone hovering between teasing and dismissive. You know, those remind me of that character on TV, he said, his voice casual, but I could feel the sting of his words before they landed. He didn't even have to say the name. I knew exactly who he meant. The comparison wasn't flattering. It wasn't supposed to be. Before I could stop myself, I laughed it off. That's what I've trained myself to do over the years. A reflex. A shield. But inside, the sting grew sharper, more acute. Why did he always do this? Why couldn't he just let me have this one thing? They were just glasses. I liked them. Did it always have to be a comment, a critique, a joke that left me questioning my choices? And of course, there was the remark about my old glasses too. How could I forget? He'd dubbed them my grandma glasses, a label that was impossible to unhear once it had been spoken. I hadn't even thought they looked outdated, but after he said it, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without imagining my face aging 10 years. They went straight into a drawer, never to be worn again. Another quiet casualty in this unending battle to meet some invisible standard. It was always and so on. That's how I'd come to think of it. The comments weren't limited to one thing. They touched on everything, spreading like vines into every corner of my appearance. My jeans, my coats, my shoes, my hair, my glasses. Nothing seemed to escape his casual scrutiny. And every time, I was left standing in the aftermath, wondering how much of myself I'd have to change to finally feel enough. Usually, I'd argue with him, though the arguments were more about defending my pride than actually resolving anything. These are not grandma glasses, I'd say, my voice sharp with frustration. I don't know what you're talking about. Or, mom jeans. Seriously? Do you even know what mom jeans look like? But it was like shouting into the wind. My words always seemed to dissipate before they reached him. He'd shrug, laugh, or say something vague like, I was just joking. As if that made it better. As if it erased the sting. Lately, though, I've been too tired to argue. What was the point? No matter what I said, no matter how much effort I put into explaining or justifying my choices, it never seemed to change his perception. His opinions were immovable, solid as stone, while mine felt like water, endlessly shifting, trying to find a shape that would fit. So instead of arguing, I started changing. Quietly, subtly. I'd stop wearing the glasses, pack away the shoes, or replace the jeans with something new. Something I hoped might finally escape his notice. But this time was different. This time, I decided to try something else. If I couldn't guess what he liked, maybe he could just tell me. Maybe we could skip the guessing game, the quiet humiliation of trial and error, and he could show me exactly what he thought would look good on me. Maybe that would finally make things easier. So, I asked him. It felt vulnerable, more vulnerable than I expected, but I asked anyway. Can you just show me some pictures of glasses you like? My voice was softer than I intended, almost hesitant. I really have no idea what you'd prefer, and I do want to look good for you. For a moment, he just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head, almost dismissively. It doesn't matter what I like, he said. I think you look fine as you are. If you really want new glasses, we can go shopping together, but I don't care. I don't care. Those 3 words echoed in my mind, louder than anything else he'd said. He didn't care. It was supposed to be reassuring, I think. A way of telling me that my choices didn't matter because I was already fine. But it didn't feel reassuring. It felt like a dismissal, a quiet confirmation of my worst fears. Fine wasn't what I wanted to be. Fine wasn't a compliment. Fine was indifference. I pressed him, trying to explain how his words felt to me, how they sounded when filtered through my own insecurities. It just feels like you are saying I'll never be attractive to you anyway, so it doesn't matter what I look like, I said, my voice breaking slightly despite my best efforts to stay composed. But he didn't protest. He didn't argue or try to convince me otherwise. He just stayed silent, the weight of his non-response settling heavily between us. And in that silence, I couldn't help but feel like I'd been answered. Maybe not in words, but in something deeper, something harder to confront. Something that felt an awful lot like the truth I'd been avoiding all along. He flat out refused my request, his voice calm but firm in that way that left no room for negotiation. "It doesn't matter what I like," he said with a dismissive shrug, as though the question itself was irrelevant. "I think you look fine." Fine. That word again, so utterly devoid of warmth or passion. "If you really want new glasses, we can go shopping together," he added, as though it was some great concession on his part. "But honestly, I don't care." I stared at him, searching his face for some sign of softness, some indication that he understood why this mattered to me. But his expression was unreadable, blank in the way that made me feel small and foolish for even bringing it up. He truly didn't care, or at least, he didn't care in the way I needed him to. Maybe he thought he was being nice. Maybe he genuinely believed that his indifference was a form of acceptance, that it should somehow reassure me. But all I heard in his words was something much colder, something I couldn't unfeel no matter how hard I tried. What I heard was this: "You will never be overly attractive to me. You're fine, and that's enough. But don't expect more than that." I couldn't stop myself from voicing what I felt, even though I knew it might sound ridiculous. Vulnerability spilled out of me in a rush, my words trembling on the edge of tears I refused to shed. "It just feels like you are saying I'll never be attractive to you anyway, so it doesn't matter what I do. That's what it feels like." For a moment, I thought he might argue. I thought he might correct me, tell me I was wrong, assure me that my fears were unfounded. But he didn't. He didn't say anything at all. The silence stretched between us, heavy and oppressive, filling the space with all the things he wasn't saying. In that silence, I felt an answer more cutting than any words he could have spoken. His lack of protest, his refusal to deny what I had said, felt like confirmation. Maybe he didn't mean it that way. Maybe he didn't realize how much his silence said. But to me, it was loud and clear. I sat with that silence for a long time, long after the conversation had ended and the moment had passed. It lingered in the air, clinging to me like a weight I couldn't shake off. Was I just being too sensitive? Was I reading too much into his words, his tone, his lack of enthusiasm? Or was this silence something deeper, a quiet truth I had been avoiding for far too long? I didn't want to admit what I was beginning to feel, what I had always felt in the back of my mind but never fully allowed myself to confront. The problem wasn't just the glasses, the shoes, the jeans, the hair. It wasn't about any single comment he had made or any one thing he had refused to say. The problem was bigger than that. The problem was this: I didn't feel loved for who I was. Not really. Not fully. Not in the way I wanted to be. It wasn't that he didn't love me. I think, in his own way, he did. But love, as I've come to learn, isn't always enough. Love without admiration, without desire, without effort, can begin to feel hollow. And in the cracks of that hollowness, insecurity grows. Doubt flourishes. You start to question yourself, to wonder if you are asking for too much, or if maybe, just maybe, you're settling for too little. As I sat there, turning the conversation over and over in my mind, I felt the weight of 7 years pressing down on me. 7 years of shared moments, shared laughter, shared life. 7 years of trying to convince myself that fine was enough, that I didn't need to be celebrated or admired or hyped up. 7 years of shrinking myself to fit into the mold of someone who didn't ask for too much. But now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe I did want too much. Or maybe I just wanted what everyone wants, to be seen, to be loved, to be desired not in spite of my imperfections, but because of them. Maybe I wanted to feel like more than fine. Maybe I deserved to. I don't have an answer yet. I don't know what to do with these feelings, these truths I'm only beginning to uncover. But I know this, I can't keep living in the space between being seen and being invisible, between feeling loved and feeling tolerated. I can't keep settling for fine when what I really want is something more. Something real. Something that makes me feel alive. Maybe I am being too sensitive. Or maybe I'm finally starting to see things clearly. For the first time in 7 years, I'm not sure which is scarier.